2025 really is the year that the 13th Doctor era landed at Big Finish, with the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Firstly, we had the Lupari, then we had the Fugitive Doctor, we've also got the 13th Doctor herself appearing later in the year, but as for this fourth guy, call him Master. We've got a new Master range at Big Finish Productions, this one starring Sacha Dhawan as what I personally refer to as the Spy Master, because, you know, if you've got the War Master, you've got the New York Master, the Eric Roberts Master, the Saxon Master, you've got Missy as well. For this guy, I call him the Spy Master, but I think he will respond to Master if you call him that. I think he will actually demand that you call him Master. But with this, we've got a new range at Big Finish Productions. This isn't even Sacha Dhawan's first foray into Big Finish Productions. Before he was even in Doctor Who, the show itself, he's got an interesting history when it comes to the production of Doctor Who. He was Waris Hussein in An Adventure in Space and Time, which is the 50th anniversary making of docudrama. He played Doctor Who's first director, Waris Hussein. He was also in a Big Finish classic Doctor's New Monster story. I think it was a Weeping Angels one with the Fifth Doctor. I think it was that story that I first heard him when it comes to Big Finish Doctor Who performances, and now he's come back to do Call Me Master, which is a new range for Big Finish. We've got a new one coming out, a second box that's coming out in September, which we don't know anything about yet, but for Call Me Master, we have Inner Demons. We've got a trilogy of stories here. We've got Self-Help by Robert Valentine, we've got The Clockwork Swan by Georgia Cook, and we've got The Good Life by Una McCormack. Self-Help seems to, and maybe there's a way you can have different interpretations on this, because the Fugitive Doctor box set that came out earlier in the year, that didn't specify exactly where in the Doctor's timeline the Fugitive Doctor takes place. It is kind of malleable. It leaves that up to interpretation, and it leaves that up as a big mystery of the box set. And as for Call Me Master, I think it plants its flag a little bit more confidently in terms of where in the Master's timeline this makes sense. Now, if you are like a Big Finish Master aficionado, you don't know if this is like a Doom Coalition Master, is this post the Lumiat, for example. It's a lot more complicated. My interpretation of this is that this is post Missy, and this story, Self-Help, takes place very early on in the Spy Master's life, before he's met up with the 13th Doctor, before the events of Spyfall, very early on in his life. And Self-Help is essentially a big commentary, a big critique on the self-help, self-therapy industry, healing crystals and meditative drum circles and, exploitative therapy sessions and such. The Master lands on this world and decides to usurp this mystical healing soothsayer guy called the Great Zenith. He takes his identity on top of this isolated mountain and thinks, okay, so there's this event that's going to happen, this spaceship's going to crash in, and I'm going to be ready for that when that happens and and dance in the wreckage. However, when calculating the time zones, he didn't carry the one, so he ends up waiting at the top of this mountain for centuries, and he has a lot of time to himself. He has a lot of time to try and figure out who he is, and at the end of that, he's none the wiser. He has no idea what's going on in his life. He's having a massive existential crisis at the top of this mountain. And what happens is that the spaceship does arrive to collect him, and he takes the identity of the Great Zenith, and the people who are on this spaceship are wanting to use the Great Zenith's healing methods, his therapy, essentially, and commodify it and learn from it. And they have these therapy sessions where the Master has assumed the identity of the Great Zenith, where he's like, please, call me Zen. And he uses these therapy sessions to try and learn about these individuals. You've got Christopher, who's the head of this group, played by Richard Fleischman, who is trying to co-opt the Great Zenith's teachings and commodify it and make money from it. You've also got other people in this group called Garth. You've got Scylla as well. The Master thinks that Scylla has killed her husband as well, and has a lot of fun prodding her on details for that. But they have these group therapy sessions. Let's play a clip from Self-Help.
Leslie.
Well, I know what my parents want me to do, to be. And they've invested so much time and energy in me. And I feel so stuck.
Yes, I think we can all relate to that.
Totally.
I'm with Scylla.
I didn't say anything.
You envy Leslie, her youth. And you think she's being an idiot?
Zen?
I said nothing of the sort.
We would tend not to use language like that in the circle.
No? Okay, noted. Well, Leslie, here's what I think. You're young, inexperienced. Your parents are killing you in the hothouse. We get it. The fact is, you're going to die. Maybe later, maybe much, much sooner. The headlights are death. You're the rabbit, and the truck will hit you whether you move or not. How you proceed from there is who you are. Garth, you talk.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm Garth.
Yeah, get to the point.
Right, I'm 47 years old. I'm recently divorced, and
Was it your fault?
Well, it's nobody's fault.
my husband left when I lost my job.
Were you bad at it?
No, the company folded because someone embezzled 10 million credits. Anyway, I've got this moral quandary I'm dealing with.
Bored. Scylla.
So, cards on the table here. I thought that Sacha Dhawan as the Master was a huge revelation in the role on TV during Chris Chibnall's era. Say what you will about Chris Chibnall as a writer, but in terms of his characterization of returning classic series villains, the Daleks, the Cybermen, the Sontarans definitely, but also with the Master, what I loved about Sacha Dhawan's portrayal in the series is that if you wanted to interpret him as a post-Missy Master, somebody who is essentially reformed or who's tried to reform, and he's continually torn between the person he wants to be and who the Doctor wants him to be and who he actually feels instinctively he is. And I think Inner Demons, this box set generally, is way more interested in that question, in this push and pull of whether the Master is somebody who can be reformed or whether or not he is more akin to a force of nature. The third story in this box set, The Good Life, leans into that and makes that much more explicitly the text, but we're leading into that. We'll talk about that one later. For this one, though, with Self-Help by Robert Valentine, it is basically it's very unsubtle in regards to how we're going to portray this version of the Master. Not in the Master's not a subtle character, but in okay, let's actually give him a therapy session. Let us have him sit down in a group circle and try and figure out who he is, and let him try and talk his emotions. You know, you can't have characters announce how they feel. Come on, that makes me feel angry. But in this case, with Self-Help, with it being passed through the commentary, the stinging critique of the commodification of self-help and the self-help industry, it's a really interesting angle to take it. And when it comes to this story in particular, basically all three of them as well, all three stories, it's not a case of can the Master be reformed, it's a case of when is the penny going to drop, when is he going to pivot, and does it even matter in the end? And that's a really interesting metatextual approach to take with the character. Sacha Dhawan absolutely thrives in all of these stories. He brings the energy that he had on screen to the Big Finish recording booths. I feel that visceral sense of anarchic energy that he brings vocally to the performance. I love the little, the moments where he kind of restrains the strange words that he chooses to enunciate. I think it's a really fascinating choice on screen, and it is even more potent when you're forced through the audio medium to listen to his dialect and to listen to his vocals. I think it's a really interesting performance, and he carries that energy across in both versions. I think it's a really great performance. He is brilliant across all of these stories. I think Richard Fleischman as Christopher in this one is basically the second main character in the story. It is the guy who's trying to commodify the Great Zenith's teachings. And what's interesting as well with Self-Help is that you get the Great Zenith, who actually was somebody who people admire and whose teachings have helped people, whose writings and words have inspired people and helped them in their own healing journeys. And the Master's sort of trying to co-opt that himself and trying to corrupt it. And I think that's a really fascinating commentary on it, how a lot of these commodifications, they have real life inspiration. They do take inspiration from actual healing practices from other cultures, both religious or both in terms of different countries and cultures and such. It borrows that and it commodifies it. The Master's doing that in his own way, but not for profit, but for chaos. I think it's a really great read on the material, and it's got a great read on what it's satirizing. I thought that was really effective and really interesting. And for Self-Help as well, It has an interesting approach where the Master's also partial narrator as well, gives it a nice bit of extra chaotic energy. Yeah, I really liked it a lot, and what happens to Christopher in the end, and Scylla and Garth and the cast of characters in the end of the story, really fun, really chaotic energy, and I really dug it. I really liked Self-Help, a really strong opening chapter, even if it is a case of let's get the Master to sit down to basically say how he feels, but it's still interesting material. It's still interesting to listen to the Master's thought process be so externalized. Sometimes it is more interesting to have it be subtext, but in this case the text itself is strong enough to carry it, especially when the Doctor is not mentioned really by name, but Christopher is like, oh yeah, do you have any friends at school? And the Master starts really obsessing on how the Doctor sees him, and I think that's really interesting, particularly in a post Missy interpretation of I tried to be good for the Doctor, it literally got me stabbed in the back, I really care what the Doctor thinks of me, but I don't want them to know it. That's really interesting. I liked it a lot. And I see some of the quotes in the chat as well. Don't mean to conversion shame you. Terrible line. It's red because it's soaked in the blood of our people is something that edgy 13-year-old me would have thought was cool, but I guess that's in character for the Master. But yeah, so that's Self-Help, a really strong opening chapter. And another very fascinating interpretation of the Master as well comes in The Clockwork Swan by Georgia Cook, and I really like Georgia Cook's writing. I think she's a real great rising star for Big Finish. She's brilliant. But what we have here is that it's set in Historica Dramatica. It's this big theme park which has these big elaborate shows, essentially like holo plays which are written by people. There's maybe some human element to it, but it's hard light holograms and projections and such, and they're able to quickly change the sets around to liven up the park. This particular play, called The Clockwork Swan, is a murder mystery story, and it's a couple of weeks away from opening, and you've got Nyseth, played by Madison Bullymont, who's a brilliant actor who they've been terrific in previous Big Finish stories as well. I can't rave about them enough. They're playing Nyseth, who is a replacement usher, because the main one called in sick, and Nyseth has come into the Hollow Park ground to oversee the dress rehearsals. And what happens, however, is that somebody dies. There's a murder, they open the curtains, a body's on stage. Who did it? Well, there's a very elaborate new detective on the scene, and I think you know who it is. Let's play a clip from The Clockwork Swan.
It's locked! We're locked in! We can't be. Let me try. It's jammed. I knew the holosystem looked dodgy when I arrived.
Ridiculous. It can't be the holosystem.
Well, what do you suggest it is?
Children, please. Now is not the time for fighting.
And just who in Nebula's name are you?
Please, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Inspector Lemaitre. My card.
Right, never heard of you. Just because you've got a little piece of card doesn't...
Shh. Have you ever had need of a detective?
Well, no, but...
Exactly.
Management was letting him sit in on rehearsals.
With fortuitous timing, it seems.
If you're a detective, can't you call someone? Galactic authorities? Anyone?
Have you tried calling someone?
I'll try my comms. Hello? This is Nyseth Tremorne, Theatre Usher Class E. We need urgent assistance at...
1890.
Sorry? What was that? I can't...
1890.
Your little telephone is not working.
It's scrambled. White noise. Nothing.
So you're saying we're stuck in here?
But the park doesn't open for another 2 weeks. We'll starve.
Ladies and gentlemen, worse than that, I fear. Far, far worse.
Worse?
We have among us a secret adversary.
So you've got the Master playing Inspector Lemaitre in this horrible French accent, clearly trying to take notes from Hercule Poirot. And like I mentioned earlier with the self-help story, it's not a matter of, will the penny drop? Because the penny is going to drop, but it also is a case of when it does drop, will it even matter? Is this like a lost cause for this group of characters? And you've got Nyseth, who's essentially almost like the companion surrogate in this story, as Lemaitre, played by Sacha Dhawan, if you believe that these are two different characters, are trying to solve the mystery of who murdered this person in the theatre. I think that it's a terrific two-hander between Niceth and the Master. The problem with the story, though, is that the rest of the characters themselves aren't particularly well fleshed out. There is a bit of like an interesting direction the story's going in where, like, it's not really a spoiler warning. It's obvious who did the murder. It's obvious, like, I don't know if that is considered a spoiler, but it's a Master box set. Of course we know who the murderer is going to be, but the Master is still following these breadcrumbs, still trying to, like, pick up the insecurities and the weaknesses of these people around him, and is able to try and, like, reverse engineer a motive in a way that this person was killed in the theatre, even though he did it. He did it. So what's he playing at? And he's getting so obsessed with this role. But it's also another, like, fun bit of comedy with it. How like, your mobile telephone, it's not working. And also he shouts Alon instead of Alonzi, like when he wants people to go. And it's like, he's so half-assing it, but he's so committed to it. But it's a weird, like, contradiction of the character. That's the inner demon. That's the inner demon in this Call Me Master box set. It's him wholeheartedly committing, but also half-assing the character of Inspector Lemaitre. But yeah, so there could be a bit of a commentary in this one in how theatre staff can be often, like, forgotten or mistreated in favour of the actual, quote, stars or the creatives. And I think that's a really interesting approach to take it, especially when you have Niceth, who's like the theatre usher, who openly complains about the minimum wage job that they're doing and how much they hate working there and how bad the company is to work with and stuff like that. They're essentially like, it's like a big Disneyland attraction, and they've got these like these actors in costumes and these actors around and stuff, and it's like minimum wage workers who are like there to maintain the illusion, and they really do not like their position within the park. And they're not even meant to be there that day. It's just horrible bad luck on their part. I think they have a real great dynamic and back and forth with it, because you have Niceth, who is so unbothered and is so uncommitted to the bit, contrasted with Lemaitre, who I guess makes me laugh saying it. It's just the Master in French. It's what they've been encumbered with this detective who's appeared out of nowhere, who is so committed to acting like Hercule Poirot. If the Master was just acting like the Master, this is like half the story it is. Not saying it's not a good story on its own, but that particular creative choice, I'm presuming from Georgia Cook, is what elevates it significantly, and Sacha Dhawan's commitment to it. It's a really fun, quote, mystery, because like I said, we know who did it. But what's interesting is that once it's revealed who done it, in this whodunit, there's still a good 15-20 minutes of the story left, because that's not what this episode's about. That's not what the Clockwork Swan is all about. It's about, does it even matter? The Master is playing them so effectively, is so has positioned himself so strongly in this scenario, that how on earth is he going to be overpowered or stopped when what his deal is and what his plan is ultimately revealed to be, and whether or not Niceth is like doomed from the start. It's a really interesting bit of dramatic irony that the audience will presumably be in on, provided that they've watched or listened to a story that involves the Master at any point in their life. If this is your introduction to the Master, you're in for a wild ride. But if you know about the character, if you know about the Master from previous stories, or even previous Big Finish, like the War Master, where the War Master basically almost always wins, then you're in, you're also part of the meta aspect of it as well, of the whodunit that doesn't really matter who done it. And I think that's a really interesting creative conceit here. And you've even got like the double meaning as well of the stars being the main attraction, because the Master himself in this story is giving a performance. He's losing himself to this role of Lemaitre, to the extent where you kind of are wondering, has he been like chameleon arched? Like, is that the deal here? He's so into this bit, but every so often he'll have these like asides to the metaphorical camera, and he'll just speak in his normal English accent and like with a witticism or an observation, and it's okay, yeah, he's playing this role here. So is the Master like Roger, an American Dad? More than you know, because we have the third story in this box set. We have The Good Life by Una McCormack, and I love Una McCormack's writing, but if you know anything about Una McCormack, she's very good at writing downer stories. So basically, I don't know if this is actually set on Earth, I'm presuming so. But The Good Life takes place on this distant island where you've got this big religious sect, this like almost like monkish type people who are basically separated themselves from humanity, and they're there to try and keep, quote, the balance. You've got Elta, who is this woman who's wanting to learn about these people. She's come from the shore. She's come from the mainland, basically, this coastal community. She's there to want to learn from these people, learn about their ways, and learn how they keep the balance. Get, who is the weather worker, he's basically the teacher who is leaving the island to basically go and retire. And you've got Rate the boatman, who takes people from this island to the mainland and back and forth and stuff. And Kurta, who is also this mistrustful character on the island who is implied to be a witch. But they also have a brand new resident there who is played by Sacha Dhawan, and he's basically secluded himself from everybody else. Nobody trusts him, nobody likes him. You've got Kurta as well, who basically spends every day yelling at him. And Elta takes a bit of pity on him, on this newcomer, doesn't know who this person is, but wants to get to know them and maybe even learn from them as their new teacher since Get has left. Let's play a clip from their first initial meeting. Let's play a clip from The Good Life.
Right.
Does she come every day to shout at your front door?
Yes, most days.
But why? Why does nobody stop her?
They're not used to new faces around here.
But it's not very...
Not very balanced. I think she's been alone for a long time. But enough about her. What about you? Whatever brought you here in a storm like that?
I hope it doesn't sound foolish, but I came looking for a teacher.
A teacher?
Yes, I know. No new teachers here in living memory.
In living memory. Your people say that a lot. But you know, for some, that's a very long time.
What do you mean?
Never mind. Please, carry on.
All I want is...
Yes? What do you want?
I want to know about...
Yes?
Oh, about everything.
I see.
I want to learn.
Well, that's lucky, because that's what I want too. Shall we learn together?
What? Yes! Yes! I'd love that. Thank you, teacher.
I think we can hold off titles for now.
All right.
It's a lovely day. Shall we start in the garden?
Love that comment in the chat from Anita. Oh, his voice is hard. It is a little bit. But so The Good Life is... I mentioned it earlier with The Clockwork Swan, where you're kind of wondering, like, is this ruse actually authentic? Is this some Chameleon Arch thing? Is this some sort of, like, borderline personality disorder or something, like multiple personalities or something? And it's really interesting because he's so happy and so earnest sounding in that clip, but very much like O was in Spyfall. O came across as so earnest. O came across as so friendly and welcoming and warm. So he has precedent for this. And that's one of the bits of tragedy when it comes to Utopia from 2007, when you really like and love Professor Yana and you want him to be who he says he is. But then it turns out he's like not only the Master, he's the War Master, which is probably the most dangerous and depraved version of the Master that we've had in the franchise's history, who hates girls. But when it comes to The Good Life, it's a fascinating way that these stories intertwine with each other, particularly self-help. When it comes to the Master having this existential crisis of self, where he's trying to be good, he's trying to be a good balance in the universe, but if he is there to be balanced, surely he has to contrast against the Doctor, and that could be some extra metatextual stuff when it comes to Una McCormack's The Good Life here. But when it comes to how the Master perceives himself and wanting to be good or wanting to try and better himself as a person, he's almost sort of like depicted more akin here in a much more frightening way than you would have in other incarnations. Not trying to like pit them against each other or anything, but for the purposes of The Good Life for this story, you've got Elta, who is earnestly wanting to learn from him and earnestly wanting to help people, and she comes from this coastal town, and she pops back every so often to see family and friends there. And what's happening in this coastal town, which does not go named as far as I can remember, is that they're having essentially a quote migrant crisis, where you've got these people coming up from the valley who are now settling into the community, and people there in this coastal town are very anxious and are very worried about that. And even though they're moving into previously empty or abandoned houses, they're not actually doing anything bad. There is this sense of distrust in the coastal community, and Elta's trying to figure out a way to help them, to try and make them see sense and reason here. And we later learn, mild spoilers, we later learn that these people from the valley are moving because there's been a big natural disaster where they've come from in the valley. There have been floods, there have been mudslides, their homes have been destroyed, and you learn that these people are essentially climate refugees, which in the coming years and decades and over the next century, if the stats and statistics as they currently are, if they continue through, they're going to be the biggest like climate they're going to be the biggest demographic of refugees in the 21st century because of climate change and all these big weather events. It's going to be climate refugees. And it's interesting how they contrast that with the Master, who is depicted here in contrast with the complementing the floods and the mudslides in the valley, is depicted more akin to like a force of nature, like a natural disaster. And it seems like over this story, he's actually trying to restrain himself and contain the madness within, and it's just not taking. And that really does a great job at humanizing this version of the Master and making it more of a tragedy, similar to Alone, which was the War Master story from the Rogue Encounters box set. I think that was written by Scott Hancock. And that story tells the story of Professor Yana, who is this nice, sensible, meek old man with no family, who has got these impulses because of the fob watch that he's got that causes his life to become ruined. And that is a similar wavelength, whether intentionally or not, that I think we're dealing with in The Good Life by Una McCormack. I think that both writers are dealing with similar themes here when it comes to the Master as a tragedy, where, you know, the lore is the Master looked into the untempered schism when he was a kid, and that basically fated him for life, and his multiple incarnations fated them for life to this path where they can no longer be a good force for the universe, and they are now relegated to this destructive anarchic Time Lord. And I think that's a really interesting tragedy here, and I think this box set explores that very effectively, particularly the last few minutes when the Master kind of lets loose and essentially decides on a whim to destroy Elta's entire worldview and approach. Really brutal stuff. It's a really fascinating box set. I don't think there's a bad one amongst them, and if I had to be forced to pick one, which one was my favourite, I don't know if I could. These are really good stories that also complement each other thematically so well, with the Master, with the Spy Master's sense of identity, with his like reluctant villain who's just compelled to the madness. I'm not sure. It's what I love about Sacha Dhawan's interpretation of the Master on screen, because if you watch him on screen, he has this manic energy and this like visceral evil and hate and disgust, but he also looks like he's on the verge of tears the entire time, and that's what I love about him. That's why I really, really loved Sacha Dhawan's version of the Master, and for them to expand on that so effectively for Big Finish, it says really positive things about this range moving forward. Call Me Master 2 comes out in September. We don't know anything about it other than Sacha Dhawan's casting in it and involvement in it, but this was a really strong opener that really does a great job expanding the character. If you have no patience, no tolerance for whatever reason for Sacha Dhawan's Master, not judging, but if you do, this one might not be for you. But if anything I've said to you in this review maybe has you considering, maybe has you has piqued your interest, whether it's my commentary or Sacha Dhawan's sexy voice, I don't know, I'd say give it a shot. I'd say dive in. This is a really compelling through line to take this character. Sacha Dhawan's terrific with the material, the writers are great, the supporting cast are really strong as well. I mentioned earlier, Madison Bulliment is really terrific here as well. Elta, played by Bethany Antonia, is really strong as well. Christopher, played by Richard Fleischman, really strong cast throughout, really great actors, complementing Sacha Dhawan, really great two-handers, 3 great two-handers. Yeah, really strong, really strong box set.